We are live with
nearly live.
Timber Hawkeye. Welcome everybody to the Vortex Energy Podcast. And we've got Sue here as well, Grandmother Sue. Timber is the best-selling author of the Buddhist Boot Camp and the book Faithfully Religionless. His books and the Buddhist Boot Camp Podcast offer a secular and non-sectarian approach to being at peace with the world, both within and around us, with the intention to awaken, enlighten, enrich, and inspire. He's the author of 2 books, a mega podcast, and lots of other fun stuff. So welcome, Timber. Welcome to the virtual Australian global reality show.
Aloha. I wish I was there in person.
That's great. So we were just chatting a little bit before we came on, and one of the things that we were talking about was how so many people think they don't know how to meditate. They want to learn how to meditate. They don't know where to start. What's your real key guide to how should people get started meditating?
Well, the challenge I encounter a lot is from people who feel like they're doing it wrong, or they just give up. They say, I can't do it, because they've read books or they've listened to talks that tell them they have to sit a certain way and they have to cross their legs a certain way, and their eyes have to be pointing at a 45-degree angle with, breathing in one nostril, out the other. And of course they give up, and they feel like they're doing it wrong for one reason, is because at some point, somewhere along the way, someone told them there's a right way to do it. And I think that's very counterproductive, because, painting can be meditative, running can be meditative, gardening could be meditative. It doesn't have to look a certain way. And the moment you have a very concrete idea of how it's supposed to look, then as long as you don't fit into that, which ranges from day to day, then you feel like you're doing it wrong. And that's not the point of meditation. It's just a way to get your mind to focus on what you want it to focus on, rather than letting it, run loose. It's the equivalent of having a puppy, and when you take it out for a walk, it knows to stay on your side. But then when you get to the dog park, you take the leash off and it runs and it does what it wants. The mind is the same way. No problem with taking it off the leash and letting it brainstorm. Yeah. But when it comes time, let's say, to go to bed or to focus on something or to not focus, you want to be able to put a leash on it and have it sit by your side. And the only way to be able to do that is practice. Just every day, just find one thing to focus on. It could be a prayer, it could be a mantra, it could be a breath, it could be gardening. And just as long as your mind doesn't wander while you're doing exactly that, you are essentially meditating.
I love that. And I tell people all the time, there's a reason it's called the practice of meditation, because it is a practice and you have to do it to get better at it and to have any type of benefit. Does take that practice.
Yeah. It's not that practice makes perfect. It's practice makes practice more practicable. It just becomes easier. And even if all you do is sit for 5 minutes and say, for 5 minutes, I'm not going to physically move. Just physically, I'm not going to move. If there's an itch in the back of my head, I'm not going to scratch it. If there's, my foot's falling asleep, I'm not going to rub it. I'm just for 5 minutes. When the timer goes off, sure, I'll do whatever I want, but for 5 minutes. And the benefit of those 5 minutes is not those 5 minutes. It's not just so you can tap yourself on the back and say, good job, you didn't move for 5. It's so later in the day, when something triggers you, when you're inclined to, respond, react, you've practiced, you've exercised that muscle of not reacting. And you're essentially lengthening that gap between impulse and response. And that's what mindfulness is. In that gap, you can cross-reference what you're about to do with your core values, and then you respond rather than react, if that makes sense. And that's the distinction between mindful action and mindless action.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. What do you think, Sue? Any comments?
Yeah, it's wonderful, the simplicity of saying all that. And I've always taught people, well, when I've tried to help people meditate, I just tell them to listen, because the mind isn't neutral when you're listening. It can't think and listen at the same time. So it's just a matter of, again, taking that time and practicing.
And I wanted to just chat briefly about your book, Buddhist Boot Camp, because I think there are many hidden gems all through it. And I love that it's set up in a way that you can pick up any chapter at any time, or kind of open the book and see what falls into hits for you, what messages for you at that moment. So, Sue, what were some of your favorite parts of Timber's book, A Buddhist Boot Camp?
To me, it's just the simplicity of teaching and taking the woo-woo out of all the spirituality. It's just a normal growth rate and a normal part of life. And if we can do it simply and easily, it just is so much easier, you know, and that's really striking. He brings everything back to basics and just teaches everything that is so easy to learn. That's how it should be taught, I think.
Yeah, no, you did phenomenal, Timber. That was great. So how did you come up with that name?
Simple. We just overcomplicate things.
Yeah, we do.
With Buddhist Boot Camp or with Timber Hawkeye?
Both, actually. I was gonna ask. That was gonna be the next question.
Well, the book Buddhist Boot Camp it's a collection of 8 years of my journal entries and letters that I sent to my friends along my own journey. And one day, one of my friends suggested that I publish those journals, those emails. And I thought, you know, if I was to put a title to my diary, what would it be? And my life felt like a Buddhist boot camp, you know, just the crash course, jumping into the deep end. Because, you know, very true to my nature, when someone suggested, let's say when I was in the Tibetan temple and the Lama said, you know, why don't you try Zen instead? Because the Tibetan culture didn't quite resonate with me too much. I didn't just pick up a book on Zen. I moved into a Zen monastery. It's just kind of the way I do things. And so trying to put a title to all of that, Buddhist Boot Camp, is really what it felt like. And the book, because it's, as you said, so short, it's every chapter is only a page long, and you can read them in any order because it's just a collection of emails. You can essentially pick up any page and just read that without necessarily it relating to the chapter before or after. And my name, my goodness, I talk about it in the second book, and Faithfully Religionless. When I moved from Israel to the States, no one could pronounce my birth name. It was Tomel Gal, which ironically enough means, Tomel means palm tree, and Gal, my last name, which my parents made up when they got married, means ocean wave. So my parents named me Palm Tree Ocean Wave, and I ended up living in Hawaii for 10 years, which is just awesome. But because my parents made up their last name, I felt very free to do the same. And back in 1995, when my first graphic design was published, the company for which the logo was created wanted to know what name to put on it. And I said, Timber. And when they asked what's Timber's last name, I was stumped. I don't know, Timber doesn't have a last name. It's been my nickname since I moved to the States because no one could pronounce Tomel. So I felt frozen. And I was first year of college, and you know, they were in New York, I was in California, and they didn't care about the story about my parents and their last name. They just wanted a name so they can hang up the call and make the next one. And I lived on Hawkeye Street, so I said Hawkeye, and I hung up the phone. And then I thought, you know, Timber Hawkeye, that sounds actually pretty good. So I had it legally changed. I'm sorry, it's not a more heroic story, but that's the truth. That's where the name came from.
I like the origins of your original name as well. You could have just been called Greater Ocean Wave.
Yeah.
That's great. So tell us a little bit about your philosophy is completely non-sectarian, and you go into this a lot in actually both of your books, a little bit about your different faiths you've been exposed to. How is it for you that you've come really full circle to just say you're embracing all types of spirituality in however somebody may perceive them? How did you come to that place?
I came to it through, honestly, just pure logic. It was just a seek for a simple and uncomplicated life. And I started generating my own, not so much by adding things to my life to make it simple, but by looking at my life and figuring out what's making it complicated. How can I take it out? You know, and when I did that and I just started removing the very things that cause our anguish, I realized I'm essentially living a monastic life. Like I was a monk before I knew what a monk was, before I even took my monastic vows. And so it wasn't so much that I sought, a monastic living or spiritual teachings or anything. I was looking for, essentially the answer of, how are we creating our own suffering? What part of me is doing that? And it, well, I guess first it's to stop blaming other people for my suffering and realize that I'm creating it myself. And when I realized I'm doing it, then I thought, well, how can I stop? And so I eliminated the very things that cause it, whether it be taking things personally or overthinking things or thinking that I know anything with any certainty. That was a big one. As soon as I realized the only thing I know for certain is that I don't know anything for certain, I felt very free, because then I didn't feel like I needed to prove myself right to anyone, and essentially making them wrong so I can be right, or making myself superior by making them inferior. I didn't need to do any of that. I just was open to hearing what anyone has to say. And that's why the first principle in Buddhist Boot Camp is that the opposite of what you know is also true to somebody else, somewhere else, depending on their time, place, and circumstance. And as soon as I can make peace with that someone who believes the exact opposite of me is also correct, that's their truth, that's their reality, then I don't need to prove them wrong. I don't need to fight with them. I just listen with an open heart and open mind to understand, how is it that your truth is so different from mine? And I started studying both religion and psychology simultaneously to understand not just what people believe, but why we believe what we do. And that's the juicy stuff. That's the really interesting, like, how did you get to where you are? And it doesn't matter where someone is, there is a logical explanation to every single part of it. It doesn't matter if you're part of the Ku Klux Klan or if you're an entrepreneur and creating nonprofit organizations to help people all over the world. Both of them are contributed by certain decisions and life events. And when you stop with the judgment and you just look at it as what contributed to all of that, then you can follow the dots. You can connect it and go, well, that actually makes sense. I understand why you joined the Klan, or I understand why, you hate who you hate, or you're preconditioned to date who you're dating. It all makes sense. And then when you have understanding, you've dropped judgment. It's kind of like Sue was saying earlier, that two things cannot coexist, so to speak. Your mind can't process two opposing thoughts at the same time. That's what causes dis-ease. That's what causes conflict within us. And so, like, you can't be grateful to be married and angry at your spouse at the same time. The moment that you are angry at your spouse is the moment you've forgotten how grateful you are to have them in your life. And when you go back to gratitude, the anger goes away. It's one or the other. I don't know if that makes any sense at all, but it's that whole cognitive dissonance plus spirituality kind of marrying each other.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I think particularly in our times, and particularly in the US and around the world, where we have people of great political confrontations and spiritual and religious confrontations, which is how most of our wars are occurring today, and probably have occurred for many thousands and thousands of years. But I just see people going even more separate. So that was, to me, one of the most meaningful parts that came to me from your the first book. How do you look at somebody who has the complete opposite idea from you and simply listen and try to understand? And doing that with compassion is, I think, the greatest challenge most of us face today, because we all want to believe we're on the right side.
I say, I'm not attached to being right at all.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm right.
I get
part
that.
Of that
I think that's the hardest thing for most humans to let go of.
Yeah, well, then there's your suffering.
Yeah.
And that's why so much of Buddhism is around letting go, because if you can let go, I tell people to let go of old dishes they don't use anymore, or old clothes, or old towels that are moldy and still there, or clothes that don't fit, or whatever. The benefit is not necessarily the clothes that you got rid of, or the extra dishes. It's not that they're doing any harm. It's that getting rid of them letting go of them is beneficial because you're exercising that muscle of loosening your grip, of being with the flow. And if you can start letting go of junk in your house, you can then let go of old opinions, beliefs, judgments, the junk in your own head. It's all connected, it's all related. And the way we do one thing is the way we do all things. So if we habitually cling to everything, then it's going to be really hard to let go. I saw a quote that said, everything I've ever let go of had claw marks in it, you know, because we cling to everything so tightly. And so the invitation is not to give all up, it's just to loosen our grip, you know, even on the idea that we are right about it, that anyone is right about anything, is so liberating. Because you know, and I take it to an extreme in the second book. I say, you know, if somebody tells me the sky is green and I believe it to be blue, I don't need to argue with them. I don't need to tell them it isn't. I don't need to say, Alexa, what color is the sky? You know, I don't need to get a bunch of people to agree with me. I just walk away from that experience knowing that to some people, the sky looks green. And I can do that. You asked why is that so difficult? I can do that because the blueness of my sky is not at all jeopardized by how green someone else perceives it to be. My sky is still just as blue. So there's no need to be right and have a blue sky. I can just have a blue sky. They can have a green sky, and the wheels of the bus go round and round.
That's fantastic. So Timber, let's.
It's a shame our politicians don't have any lessons.
Yeah,
those
we'd
kind
like
of
to
lessons.
Your work out to the political masses and to all humans.
Well, they're teaching us a very important lesson as well, and that's I think the kind of the appropriate response is to look at whatever is happening, and instead of judging it as good or bad or horrible or wonderful, I just look at all of it and I go, well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
And just stay there. Interesting is neutral, and trusting, you know, it's whatever is going on, it's and then to go, you know, if something is not aligned with my values, then I'm not going to go and fight against what I'm against. That just adds more power to it. It lives me, you know, white knuckled and fighting. And so I often invite people, if something doesn't sit well with you, if you're witnessing something that you feel is unjust or whatnot, don't fight against it. You know, find what are you for and fight for that instead of against something else. So, you know, don't, you know, I don't know how else to say, like, promote what you love instead of bashing what you hate. If you're going to use your energy, use it to that end, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, makes perfect sense. You know, and that's, we see it a lot, particularly in Tasmania here, which has some of the purest environment on the planet. We have some of the oldest trees. We have the purest water. We've got the Antarctica bringing up the cool, clean water. And so we see a lot of people really divided here. Are we a logging state, or are we the cleanest, purest state? And so learning how do you live and create the positive version of that state versus trying to diss the negative side of what someone may perceive as happening. So we see it on a very...
And honoring the fact that someone who believes the exact opposite from you, they actually believe they're part of the positive and you are part of the negative. That's the thing. It's like when you start hating the hater, you become a hater. So, you know, it doesn't matter what the division is. And I think adding the words, you know, for now to the end of every sentence and according to me at the end of every sentence is really, really freeing, because you can say, you know, it's got some of the nicest water for now. It's got some of the most pristine beaches for now, you know, that's just, and because everything is in a constant state of change. And so you're loosening your grip on, but we have to keep it this way. It's like, no, you don't. It is what it is, and it's going to go through its natural flow. And if Mother Nature gets too upset, she'll do what she's going to do anyway. And we're just going to have to learn to live with it. And it's just, are we part of the angry, the hateful, the hurtful, it has to be my way? Or is it just, you know, how do we bring peace into the world if we're not at peace with ourselves? You know, if we're not peaceful, because I saw someone the other day, he was a very angry peace activist. And I don't think he saw the dichotomy in that, you know, I don't think he got it.
We see that a lot. I think that's a very common thing going on these days. And so I love your concept of being able to see both sides and allow forgiveness and understanding on both sides.
Yeah, and even if you don't see both sides, just honor the fact that there always is at least like what, three sides to every story, and Gandhi said that true happiness is when what we think, what we say, and what we do are all in alignment. And so how can we possibly live in that alignment with our values if we're not even clear about what they are?
Yeah.
So I think the most important thing to do when we get triggered or something happens is to go back and look at our own and write down our values, be really clear. We expect nonprofit organizations to tell us what their vision statement is, what their values are. We want it to be on their website. We want them to be listed. And then we hold them up to living in line with those values. But individually, we don't do that. I travel all over the world and I've been and stayed with, very angry vegans, for example, because how to tell if someone's vegan, they'll tell you. And it's just amazing that they'll be out there protesting and angry and telling people what they should and shouldn't eat. And then they'll get into their car with their leather seats, or they'll go home and they'll use their toothpaste that's tested on animals. It's like, just sweep your own front stoop, just take care of this. And because there's plenty there, there's plenty for all of us to do here at home before we start telling other people what they should and shouldn't do according to us, the almighty and all-knowing force of the universe.
Makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. Are you ready for some quick questions, Timber?
Sure.
What's been the greatest spiritual lesson in all of this for you?
Letting go, I think. I don't know. Just not knowing. Not being comfortable with not knowing. And yeah, that's the greatest. No matter what happens, it's just go back to what is it that I'm clinging to, and what part of me is arguing here. What part of me is, and it's always the ego, like the God within doesn't need to prove itself. It just sits there quietly. It's like, what to do. But the ego, man. So I just check in with me and go, where is this coming from? Where's that feeling or that need or whatever? Where's it coming from? And if it's from the ego, I just don't pay any much attention and I just go on with my life. It's a very long answer. I apologize.
No, not at all. That was great. So how do you define consciousness?
Ooh. Well, I think from a very early age, we've been raised with the concept through cartoons that there's like an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, and we're just like trying to figure out what's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. And it's not about, eternal damnation versus bliss. And it's not, I think when we're trying to figure out what to do, we're neither the angel nor the devil. We're the ones sitting here watching that conversation happening. So that's the concept. If we can step back into our consciousness and be aware that there's a part of us judging what's happening, but not identify with that part, but just be aware that, hey, there's a part of me that's getting very triggered right now. And that's not who I am. That's just part of, I don't know if that makes any sense. So consciousness is the observer of that conversation, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Being the observer. I love it.
Yeah. Yes. The observer. Good.
Yeah. And what is your definition of God?
I would say whenever I try to define one word, I always think, well, what would be the opposite of it? Because then I have a better understanding. Like when someone asks me, what is mindfulness? It's like, well, what's mindlessness? And they go, well, that's easy. I'm like, okay, then the opposite of that is mindfulness. And so if I think of God, the opposite of that to me would be, in a sense, the ego. So if anything is self-centered, self-serving, mindless and short-sighted, then the God within is selfless. It's caring, giving, forgiving, kind. It's the part that takes care of all. It's not one, it's all, or understanding that all are one. Whatever it is, it's the awareness, if nothing else. And so when we check in with the God within, because we have, it's funny that we have like the word namaste, the God in me sees the God in you. And that's beautiful because we realize that there's a higher power, there's some energy, there is some, wise guru within each of us And every once in a while we take that moment to acknowledge, hey, there's that divinity that's inside of me is also inside of you. However, we don't have a word for the ego in me sees the ego in you. You know, I think it would be really helpful to have that, because then when someone acts out of ego, I'm like, hey, I get that. Yeah, I get why you're doing what you're doing. I get why you're being selfish. I've been there, you know, and so there's no judgment. The ego in me sees the ego in you. I get it. And so I think it's that distinction between selfless and selfish. That's the best way I can come up with it.
Interesting. Sue, any comments? You'd like to jump in here?
No, it's basically just, as he says, it's like an acceptance of life versus a non-acceptance of life. When you stop feeling you have to change it, then you're basically happy in yourself and accepting yourself for who you are. It's, again, a very simple, easy, complex to learn, thing to learn. It's just doing it that's not that easy.
And I don't know if we need so much to learn anything new so much as unlearn all the other stuff we picked up along the way. I think naturally our natural state understands this. Our natural state understands being at peace and being kind and being caring. It's just that we've learned how to be fearful and hateful and judgmental. And so we need to just unlearn all of that and go back to our natural state of peacefulness.
Yeah, nice. So, Timber, what does your spiritual practice look like on a daily basis these days?
Like a routine. There's just, my life is very much like everyone else's. I think, again, with mindfulness being nothing more than the gap between impulse and action, then I would say that the difference would just be that gap is I introduce that gap between my feeling hunger and what I'm eating. And in that gap, I cross-reference, okay, what I'm about to eat, and is it in line with my core values? And if it is, then I move forward. What I'm about to say, is it in line with my core values? Then I go ahead and do it. Any step I make I always cross-reference it with my core values to make sure that I'm not creating dis-ease within me, that I'm not creating conflict within me where I say one thing and do another. So I live a life just like everybody else. Except I did make a commitment to only work part-time so I can live full-time. And that was very liberating in and of itself. I talk a lot about that in, I think, both books and on YouTube channel and my podcast and all of that. Yeah.
So does your current, your activities on your spiritual practices and your books and things, do you still keep a second part-time job, or is that enough of kind of a part-time job in itself?
I created a publishing house for my second book because I didn't want to publish through the big publisher again. And halfway through the second book tour, I realized that I now have a publishing house for just one title, which felt really silly. And so I now publish other authors, and I've been doing that for a couple of years. So I'm helping them get their books out. I'm a Lyft driver, so that's another thing that I do in my downtime.
Cool.
And the job itself, you know, I give talks. And that's the non-paying part, you know, because I never charge for my talks or anything like that. And I go and I speak at correctional facilities and rehab clinics and recovery centers and high schools. And so that keeps me pretty busy in and of itself, for sure.
I wanted to dive deep into that because I know that you spend a lot of time working with the correctional facilities, and specifically your books you're using in many, many facilities. Can you give us an idea of how many of your books that you know of have been given to the correctional facilities?
Oh, thousands, literally, because every time somebody buys a copy of the book from my website, another copy is donated to the Prison Library Project, and they get 300 letters a week from inmates asking for spiritual books that aren't necessarily Christian. And so they just have stacks and stacks of my books there to just almost like leaflet them out. And and the same thing with high schools. Buddhist Boot Camp is required reading in a few high schools across the US. And I go and I speak to them. So I don't keep track of any of that. It's just constant. It's just
That's
flowing
just so
outwardly.
fantastic.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's not my doing. That's what's beautiful about it. It's everyone else contributing to it, and they're keeping it going. They acknowledge the benefit of that. And I just kind of create that possibility, if that makes sense.
No, I love it. I think that's absolutely amazing. And I think that's clearly, because what I love best about your books is just they're written in a very easy conversational style. I think that a lot of people are going to be able to absorb the messages that you're sending in a story-like way. I think that's the greatest asset of your books, that the average person's going to be able to read it and go, wow, that's significant.
Yeah, for someone who wants to study Buddhism in a scholarly sense, this is not the book. And there's plenty of books for them to study if they want to read about the sutras and the history. And my invitation is to don't even worry about being a Buddhist or Christian. Just be Buddha-like or Christ-like, and just, it's not about the heady scholarly part. It's like, how do I actually apply these ancient teachings into my daily life? That's what I was looking for. And that's what I created. So thank you. I'm glad it resonated in the same spirit in which it was intended.
Fantastic. So what do you think happens when we die, Timber?
I don't know.
None of us obviously know for real.
Yeah, and I'm okay with not knowing, so much so that I proceed with curiosity, not with fear. The way I have through my living part is proceed with curiosity, not with fear. And the only thing that keeps me double guessing or thinking about maybe this whole reincarnation thing is real is when you meet a 5-year-old or you hear about a 5-year-old who just wrote a symphony or something, and you're like, okay, wait a minute, you clearly did not learn this in the last 5 years on Earth. Where is that from? And that's the only thing that kind of gets me thinking that maybe there's some residual knowledge with which we are born from a previous life, that we kind of pick up where we left off and get going. And to what end? I can only imagine, so we can learn to be completely selfless. And if we don't learn it in one lifetime, we'll just pick up where we left off until we get to that point of getting to live a completely selfless life for the benefit of all.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I just wanted to bring that up because I know you talked about it recently in one of your blogs, that we don't often talk about dying, or the fact that this is a finite little universe that we live in here.
Oh, yeah. And dying is very different. I mean, your question was about after we died. I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. But like the death part, yeah, my most recent blog entry, because I send out one email a month, just one blog entry a month. And it's always on the first of the month. And it's just food for thought, just to kind of, something to chew on, things that perhaps we don't talk about on a regular day-to-day, but would really help us contemplate a little more deeply.
Yeah. No, I think that was great. And so, Timber, what advice would you give someone just starting out on their spiritual path?
Trust those who search for the truth. Be wary of anyone who claims to have found it.
That is a great line. Very good. Yeah. And so Timber, what's the best way for people to reach out to you who want more information about what you do and the sharing of all of your thoughts and your process and your path?
Well, I try to make the message available. The message has enriched my own life so much that keeping it to myself just felt, again, very, very selfish. And so the only thing I could do was share it with others. And what made the most sense is to meet people where they are. So it's on Facebook through Buddhist Boot Camp. There's a Buddhist Boot Camp website, just BuddhistBootcamp.com. There is the Buddhist Boot Camp YouTube. There's a Buddhist Boot Camp podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts, just wherever people are. There's the Buddhist Boot Camp Instagram page. It's just meeting where people are rather than having them go somewhere else, and offering it to them in the same format language that we can then apply into our daily lives. So I think if you just go to BuddhistBootcamp.com, you'll see all the options there. The blog, the podcast, the Facebook page, the Instagram, the Books to Prisons project, the journal, everything. It's all there.
Fantastic. Tell us a little bit about your new journal. I know that's coming out. We didn't get a chance to dive into that.
Yeah, so it's a monthly journal with daily food for thought. Someone had asked me, because I focus so much on all of us being very clear about what our core values are. And someone recently asked me, well, what if I don't know what my core values are? Can you give them to me? And I said, absolutely not. But I can ask you all the right questions. So by the time you are done, you have a clear idea of the kind of person you want to be, the kind of life you want to lead, and what your values are. And so I figured if I do a monthly journal with daily questions that no 2 days are the same, and just pick a theme for each month, then by the end of the year, by the end of someone really going through that process of contemplating for just 5 minutes every day, some simple questions. It's not just a question and response like, what are you grateful for today, which we tried last year and it was great, but it kind of lost its momentum halfway through the year. So creating a separate one for each month, I think, is the new way to go. And so the journal is available, only the January one so far. I essentially committed to writing 11 more books this year, and that's terrifying. But the January one is available for people to start on January 1st, and before February, the February one will be available. And it's available where, online or wherever you get books. And I think it's a really wonderful way for us to get in touch with ourselves and journal when we're not so comfortable with just staring at a blank page. We need some prompts, if that makes sense.
Fantastic. So I really encourage everybody to go check out all the places that Timber is available. And I really loved his both of his books. I think Buddhist Boot Camp was my favorite of the two, if I had to pick a favorite. But
just because of the short format, where I love the audio version of Faithfully Religionless, the Audible. I narrated it myself. If you ever listen to audiobooks or in the car a long time, it'll feel like I'm sitting right there in the passenger seat next to you. And it was a lot of fun to record the Audible for Faithfully. So enjoy that too. Thank you.
Oh, cool. So can you finish these sentences, Timber? The world needs
transparency.
Love it. I believe in
the good in people.
Nice. Love is
the absence of judgment, as the Dalai Lama says.
I would like to thank
everyone, everything. I don't even know who's responsible for everything that's happening right now. I think we all are. So I'm grateful for all of it.
Nice. And I'm ready to forgive. Some of these may not apply to you. You may have already done all that work, that forgiveness.
Yeah, I can't think of anyone else. I am ready to forgive whoever is going to cause me harm in the future. They're already forgiven.
Nice. Nice. Sue, do you have any questions for Timber before we wrap up?
No, I think it's just been a wonderful opportunity to hear some beautiful common sense and pure teaching. I think that's just marvelous. And I'm just so grateful there's people out there now leading the way. And yes, you are leading the way. It's just difference from everybody following. They actually can walk along beside you rather than following a dogma or a type of religion or anything like that. It's the kind of leadership the world needs now.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because my intention is not to create a path and tell people follow this path and it'll lead you to where my intention is to perhaps give everyone a machete with which they can create their own path through the jungle of their minds, and just, because if you follow a path, you're going to end up where someone else ended up. And I'm not suggesting everyone needs to do what I did, only that when we encounter an obstacle, that we have the tools with which to overcome them. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, years and years ago, when I first started out thinking properly, I knew I wanted to grow spiritually, but I had to define what the end product would be, so I knew what to grow towards. And it was very difficult, but I eventually came up with finding your own path and becoming purely just who you are. And that means you can't follow anything else. And I've always been very independent, so it was a reasonably easy path for me to follow. But I did hit a lot of brick walls and fight a lot until I figured things out a bit better. But it's just, we have to find our own way. We can't go another person's way.
But we need the tools with which to do that. And I think when we see someone else who has found their own way, it's very encouraging. It's very empowering to say, you know, they're not Superman, you know, that like I can do what they did, you know, and that means if I don't have the tools, I can pick them up. And that's the benefit of reading books or listening to other people's stories, is it's not to follow their path. It's to pick up tools along the way and learn how to build our own. I think we're saying the same thing. And so I'm really grateful you realized it's not about, I think it was Stephen Mitchell who wrote the book Buddhism Without Beliefs and Confessions of a Buddhist Atheist, and wonderful books. And he's the one who said, you know, when we think of a journey and we think of the spiritual path, we think of a path through the forest where, you know, all obstacles have been removed. And it's like, oh, there's the path. It's like, well, again, like I said earlier, that's someone else's. And so if we encounter an obstacle, we think, well, this might not be where I need to be. It's like, no, that the obstacle is part of your journey. Overcoming it is part of your growth. So I'm glad you've strapped on those boots and challenged on. Trailblazer.
I also had a wonderful teacher who was a great influence in my life. And the first thing he said we will do is get rid of our beliefs. So I thought, oh, I've worked hard for them. Why am I getting rid of them? But they are
you
very,
can pick
very
them up
limited.
again, but it's good to drop them and then maybe pick them up again. But if we don't question them, if we don't question why do I believe what I believe, then it just kind of becomes part of our habitual pattern, which often works against us, not for us. Sounds like you had a really great teacher. That's awesome.
I did. Awesome. It's been very lucky.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on, Timber, and really love reading your books and seeing what else you come out with, and following you on Facebook. I haven't jumped on your Instagram page. I'll have to find you on Instagram, and looking forward to staying connected. So thank you.
Aloha.
Thank you very much, Timber. Lovely to meet you.